Hi there. My name's Tom Sapsford, Assistant Professor of Classical Studies at Boston College, and it's my great pleasure today to be discussing Dido's Ghost alongside its composer Errollyn Wallen. Also joining us for this conversation are Artistic Director of Emmanuel Music, Ryan Turner, and Professor Ellen T. Harris, Distinguished Musicologist and editor of the critical edition of Purcell's score to Dido and Aeneas. Professor Harris is also the author of Henry Purcell's Dido and Aeneas, first published by Oxford University Press in 1987, followed by an expanded and revised edition which came out in 2017, which is still the definitive monograph on this early gem of English operas. Professor Harris has also written several works on Handel and was a successful vocal performer in her own right. So on to Errollyn. Errollyn Wallen was born in Belize but moved to Britain as a baby. She is a prolific music maker working across multiple styles. As the motto of her first chamber group, Ensemble X, proclaimed, "We don't break down barriers in music. We don't see any." Wallen has worked in pop, jazz, cabaret, and classical sound worlds. She was the first Black woman she was the first Black woman to have her work played at the BBC Proms, was commissioned to write music for the opening ceremonies of the 2012 London Paralympics and Queen's Diamond and Golden Jubilees. Wallen is the composer of operas, concerti for piano, percussion, and violin, several orchestral works, songs, and even a set of pieces for toy piano. She was awarded an MBE in 2007, a CBE in 2020, and last year was appointed Master of the King's Music by King Charles III. Of these achievements, one I know Errollyn is especially proud of is that 3 CDs of her music were launched into space aboard the STS-115 space shuttle mission in 2006 and traveled 186 orbits around the Earth. As well as being one of the world's 20 most performed living composers, Errollyn is also a passionate advocate for music and music education. She's created 2 series for BBC Radio, Classical Commonwealth, an examination of how classical and traditional music traditions have interacted in the British Commonwealth countries, and Dangerous Places, in which she interviewed several people making art, music, and poetry and theatre in areas of conflict around the world. Her memoir, Becoming a Composer, was published by Faber and Faber in 2023. A specific form of collaboration, which has been central to Errollyn's trajectory as a composer, has been opera. Since Four Figures with Harlequin received its premiere at Riverside Studios in London in 1994, Errollyn has written 22 operas. Their subject matter has been remarkably varied. Her cycle, Another America, weaved together historical events and fiction. The joyous and gruesomely fantastic children's opera Cautionary Tales was based on the poems of Hilaire Belloc. Today, however, we turn to mythical Carthage, Italy, and the underworld as we focus on Errollyn's engagement with Purcell and Virgil. So without further ado, let's turn now to Dido's Ghost. Dido's Ghost premiered on June the 6th, 2021, and was one of the first live operas performed in the pandemic. Commissioned by the Dunedin Consort Barbican Centre, in Edinburgh International Festival, Buxton International Festival, Mahogany Opera, and Philharmonia Baroque Orchestra and Chorale, the first performance at the Barbican Centre was followed by presentations at Buxton, Edinburgh, and San Francisco. Dido's Ghost reaches us in Boston on the 18th and 19th of October in 2 performances by Emmanuel Music at MIT's Thomas Tull Concert Hall. Before we go to Errollyn, Ryan, would you mind just giving us a brief précis of the synopsis of Dido's Ghost?
Gladly. Thank you, Tom, for this, and nice to see you, Errollyn and Ellen, as well. I'll just briefly say what Errollyn, and she will speak more about this, has sort of combined these 2 incredible worlds. And in the Aeneid, Aeneas meets Dido's shade in the underworld, where he's sent there to learn about his future. And then the rest of the plot of Wallen and Stacey's operas comes from a different Latin poet, Ovid, who tells the story of Dido's sister, Anna, in his work Fasti. We learn that after Dido's suicide, her whole realm collapsed, and Anna and Dido were driven from their home. After this rather chaotic journey, Anna survives, and washes up on shore near Aeneas's new kingdom. And that's where the opera and the plot pick up here. And it weaves together these threads of Ovid, Virgil, Purcell, Tate, and Wallen, all in one really interesting cocktail that's powerful and moving. And it sort of tells the story of how Aeneas encounters Anna, recognizes her face, her form, and then struggles with how he reconciles this with his new and current wife, Lavinia.
Errollyn, would you perhaps describe the opera for us a bit and how you came to write it?
Yes, this was an opera that was in gestation in terms of the fact that we wanted to do it 10 years before it actually went on. And I had been working with Dunedin Consort. I'd written them a work. And somebody said, wouldn't it be nice to have a companion piece to the Purcell, Dido and Aeneas? Because, that's quite a short opera, 45, 50 minutes. And to have a separate new work. And that was enough for me to jump straight on a plane and go up and meet everyone. When they just said, yeah, it's a great idea, isn't it? Then I came back again. But then we had to try and interest opera companies, other, venues in it. And actually people were interested, but it didn't go on until 10 years later. Paul Keane at the Barbican, when he heard the idea, he said, right, we've got to go on. And that was actually that was in October, and then the opera went on in June. And so it was commissioned before the pandemic, but it meant that the writing of it was all happened. Everybody was in there, was writing in isolation. We didn't even have a sing through, we cast, but I was working with the singers online. So it was written very sort of straight in circumstances, but it was one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life, feeling so close to the music of Henry Purcell and this story, which I've loved since, a young girl. Yeah, the main challenge was, as Ryan hinted at, sort of weaving, well, to continue from how I started, which was I didn't even looking for a companion piece. I think the real turning point was that together we sort of thought, no, let's weave everything in together into one opera. So in effect, the Purcell ends up telling as much of the sequel as the Wallen stays.
Because one of the features of this opera that's so remarkable, I think you originally were going to have the Purcell and your sequel performed as separate entities.
Yes.
And instead, in the writing of it, you weave the two together so that we as an audience members experience the Purcell score as part of the larger performance, as a kind of court mask?
Yes. So we start in the sequel world, when Anna washes up on shore, and all the participants are forced to reenact, the memories, the history, and so, but they do this in the form of a mask, and that takes us into the world of Purcell.
Wonderful. Could we maybe turn to Ellen for a second here? So Errollyn pointed out that Purcell's opera gets performed as a court mask, and it's often thought as developing out of that theatrical and musical genre. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about court masks in general, and then maybe touch on what we know or don't know about the creation and original performance of Purcell.
Well, the court mask, you need to go back some years before Purcell, and it is particularly in the Stuart era of the beginning of the 17th century, but even a little bit earlier, a large and lavish entertainment combining poetry and spectacular stagecraft. You can read many commentaries on the early court mask where the only people mentioned are Ben Jonson, who writes the poetry, and Inigo Jones, who does all of the stagecraft. And they actually argued with one another over which one of them was more important to the work. And you will find no mention of any composers' names. Some of the composers who wrote during this period are Thomas Campion, Ferrabasco, later on in the reign of Charles I, the Laws brothers, both Henry Laws and William Laws. But the emphasis was very much on the poetry and the spectacle. Then, of course, with the beheading of Charles II and the interregnum after 1640, and there are no kings until 1662, when Charles, sorry, did I say the wrong? It was Charles I, and then after the interregnum, Charles II comes to the throne after spending his childhood in France, and tries to re-engage with the court masque, and it is very different what he does, and it is influenced now by French opera, and the music tends to be through composed. The biggest predecessor to Purcell's Dido and Aeneas is John Blow's Venus and Adonis, and that was written for Charles II in 1683. And interestingly, then performed at Josiah Priest Boarding School for Girls in 1684. Purcell's Dido and Aeneas we don't have the same kind of information. And so there is a question as to when it might have been written and when it might have been first performed. The earliest piece of evidence we have is a libretto that was prepared for a performance at Josiah Priest Boarding School. And because of an epilogue that was written to be spoken after the work was performed, it is very clear that it was performed in 1689. Because we know it was performed in 1689 at Josiah Priest Boarding School, a theory came up associating it with the reign of William and Mary, and when they came to the throne in 1689. The problem with this theory was the assumption that because we had a libretto, that it represented the first performance. All it does is represent a performance. Since then, we have information which makes it clear that it was performed previously at Josiah Priest Boarding School, most likely in 1687. And many people believe that it was either performed at court before then, or at least written to be performed at court, but maybe never performed at court, because there is no evidence of any kind indicating a court performance. The libretto for Venus and Adonis at Josiah Priest Boarding School says, a mask entertainment previously performed before the king, in huge, big letters. And the libretto for Purcell's Dido and Aeneas at Josiah Priest Boarding School is, completely silent on the topic of any court performance. And there's no archival evidence from the court either. One element of the masque was that it was very closely tied to the court for which it was being performed, so that the aristocrats in the court frequently took part in the masque itself, masked. They wore masks. And at the end, there was always the taking out, when the king and the queen joined the performance and did court dances, led the court dances at the end. And there were mythological stories, and there were stories chosen that frequently represented the kingship specifically, or some aspect of the kingship. Curiously, Venus and Adonis, this very small piece, we know that when it was performed for Charles II in 1683, that the role of Venus was taken by his mistress, Mary Davis, or Moll Davis, and the role of the Cupid, there are only three roles. There's Venus, Adonis, and Cupid was played by their illegitimate daughter. So very closely tied to the court, indeed, and with all sorts of a little bit lurid implications for the lascivious nature of the court. And, what Adonis is dying means in terms of the king, I'm not quite sure, and I won't go there. But the question has been raised, of course, what are the court implications of Dido and Aeneas if, in fact, it was performed for court? And the theory from 35 years ago that it was performed, written for William and Mary has been totally exploded. So the question is, if it was going to be written for the court, was it written for James II or was it written for Charles II? And I don't know, and no one really knows. And you can apply allegories to it. In the theory that it was written for James II, Dido stands for England, and James is represented by Aeneas, and the so-called story is that England will suffer greatly if James in any way leaves. I really don't buy any of these stories, I have to tell you. And then Charles II, a very lascivious reading, where Dido and Aeneas, the implication is it's kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. This is what Charles does, and he loves them and leaves them. Because after all, in Dido and Aeneas, as opposed to the Aeneid, the relationship lasts one night. As Aeneas tells us himself, how can so hard a fate be took? One night enjoyed, the next forsook. So as opposed to the Aeneid, when it goes on for months and months, the relationship, here it's a one-night stand, and Aeneas turns around and goes. So I find it hard to believe that that is actually what the opera is about. It is not how I read it. It is not how I feel it. But I don't choose, but I don't think anyone else should choose either. So in terms of masks, there are any number of interesting things to say. Dido comes out of this tradition. It has a kind of French background because of the court coming in from France in 1662 brings a lot of French traditions with it. It is through composed. There is no speech. It is all sung. Just as Venus and Adonis is all sung. That's not the way the masks were in the first half of the century. But it has a lot of mask tradition in it. If we just think about the dances as they're described in the priest's libretto, assuming that the dances are original to it, which would be certainly true for a court masque, although some people believe the dances were added for Josiah Priest, who was a dancing master. So it's another question. Is that in terms of the anti-mask tradition, there were three kinds of dances. There were grotesque dances, and there were comic dances, and there were elfin dances. And Dido has all three, because it has the witches doing a grotesque dance. It has the drunken sailors doing a comic dance, and then the Cupid's dance at the end of the opera. So you have all three, and you have court dances at the beginning. In the first part, when Dido and Aeneas apparently come together as a couple, there are no words, there's no text to describe that, but there is a direction for a chaconne dance. And so a court dance in which some way it is made evident that Dido has finally said yes, even though she never gets to say yes in words. And then a second court dance after the hunt, when it is asked for a guitar dance over a ground, which would also be a kind of court dance. It's another place where the court is. And in fact, the scene after the hunt itself has been described as a masque for the court. That is within Dido and Aeneas. Mm-hmm. The opening chorus, which is "Thanks to These Lonesome Vales," is said to represent the required obeisance to Diana after a hunt, which certainly is what that chorus does, which is followed by a masque of Actaeon and Diana, which is the second woman sings the story of Actaeon and Diana. Then there's a long ritornello where some of this can be acted out. And the argument is when Aeneas enters at that point with his line, "Behold upon my bending spear, a monster's head stands bleeding," is actually part of the mask, which actually would make more sense to me than him just coming in at that point and blurting out this comment. So that if in fact there is a mask happening for the court after the hunt within Dido and Aeneas, then it's Dido who cuts it off when she says, how the thunder, something the rocks asunder, right? And changes key. I mean, you've been in D minor all along through Aeneas, but when she comes in and says, "Wait, there's a storm coming, we have to leave," the key changes and what had been going on ends. So an abrupt ending, if in fact that's what's happened at that point, because certainly that has not always been performed that way. But it's interesting when we're talking about masks to think that Dido and Aeneas has potentially a mask embedded within it. So that then using Dido and Aeneas as a mask to be performed before the court in Dido's Ghost is just brilliant.
Yeah.
Because it's like boxes within boxes within boxes, which is it just works dramatically so beautifully. Dido and Aeneas was actually used as a mask in a performance of Shakespeare's Measure for Measure in 1700. And it was broken up into pieces. And it is said in the play, you know, this is so that they, you know, Angelo does not get tired of all the music. So he hears scenes 1 and 2 at the end of Act 1, and he hears scenes 3 and 4 in reverse order in Act 2, and he hears scenes 5 and 6 in Act 3, and then the prologue is done at the end of Measure for Measure in Act 5 as the concluding mask, the mythological mask at the end of the play, as Shakespeare does in so many of his plays, like the Mask of Hymen at the end of As You Like It. So it's, those two things I think are probably the most important, which is that Dido potentially has a mask within it. And Dido was used as mask entertainment in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. So that Aeneas and Lavinia use the story, the mask of Dido and Aeneas as a court presentation, is not only historically accurate, but gives us, as I said, this box within a box quality of these works. So I'm just thrilled by it.
And this is wonderful. We have ancient precedent as well for this kind of
Yes.
intricate structure, wherein ancient epic poetry through a simile. So Dido appeared like, so for example, in the opera, we get the Diana and Actaeon, but in the Aeneid, when she first appears, she is compared to Diana and her nymphs out on the countryside ridges. So we get this kind of like inset tale already going. We're kind of lingering on Dido now. So I wonder, first off, if we could go back to Errollyn. And I know that you've been, you know, interested, to say the least, in Dido, you know, most of your musical life. What is it about Dido that attracted you to write your own version for her? And how have you developed your iteration of this famous queen?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I had to go back, had to write the program notes for them. And it's only then I realized that the Dido, thinking about Dido and the whole Dido and Aeneas story happened in my Latin classes when I would have been about 13. And before that, we were Latin teacher, very genial man, but he was obsessed with Caesar's Gallic wars, you know, and military warfare, and so we were all very bored. Then came the day, you know, poets like Catullus and Ovid, and then Virgil. Then you know, being 13, hearing this story, you know, the cave, and it sparked these pictures in my mind. But I didn't think much. I didn't think I was thinking about that story until a few years ago. I was writing some music for the Brook Street Band, who Baroque group, specialised really in Handel music, but they commissioned a song cycle. And I was, you know, like so many people, so admiring of the, you know, Dido's lament. And I thought, I wonder if there's something I can do with that. And I actually set a poem of mine, which was about, I'd written about Dido, imagining her, and set it to a sort of take on the the Purcell. And actually that music does appear in the opera, but that song was written something like, I don't know, 2007 or something. But what it is, being a composer of opera, one becomes obsessed with stories, but more importantly, that it's characters and I've just been always thinking about Dido, and through the lament, but also going back to those early days, trying to translate Latin, and suddenly coming across this such epics where the picture started to, you know, leap out at you through this really old language.
Wonderful. Can we just stop on language for a second? I'm a classic scholar, so I principally come to Dido via Latin, which obviously wouldn't have been the language that she was necessarily speaking as an exile from Phoenicia in mythological times. But both the Purcell and your Anna world, right? The world of Lavinium have very distinct languages, which are both recognizable on their own, but interact in very interesting ways. Could you talk a little bit, Errollyn, about how you developed a language for Dido's Ghost? And then maybe, Ellen, if you might talk a little bit about Purcell's musical palette and the styles that he's drawing together.
Yeah, the biggest challenge for me was, this great work, considered the first English opera. How do you approach it? And I had Ellen's score, I had all these scores, I'd read about, and I thought, what I've got to do is to imagine Henry Purcell sitting as I was in his pajamas or in his nightshirt with the libretto and setting it to music. And that's how I could get into it. And it was quite amazing. And the language is sort of pre-tonal as we know it. So early Baroque music. So it's full of modes and unexpected. Purcell's full of these unexpected shifts of harmony and melody. And that it made me understand why composers like Benjamin Britten, Vaughan Williams, Michael Tippett looked to Purcell when they were writing their own music to sort of invigorate English music. But it was bit by bit, I sort of was trying to, what was I doing? Something happened that was quite exciting. I can't tell you what it is, but I saw that looking at these triads and looking just the building blocks of the material, I could see that Purcell and I, that we were quite an interesting fit. Do you know what I mean? I brought jazz, extended, harmonies, and in a way, given the anguish part of the stories, I thought, I'm a contemporary. I can use dissonance in the way that, Purcell, composers weren't doing, and also little things. I thought, well, in Purcell's opera, Aeneas is such a sort of slight figure. He doesn't really say much, and there's one dramatic hinge where I find so interesting, where he says, "Well, I've got to go," and Dido is, overwhelmed with anguish at this, and then he suddenly says, "Oh no, I'll stay," and then her pride says, "No, go." And I thought, oh, that's quite modern. But anyway, what I think we've done in this retelling is we brought Aeneas out. He has things to say. He's more fully fledged, but all the time I was asking myself the question. I mean, I'm not a musicologist, but that thinking about the sensibilities of Henry Purcell's time, and then our sensibilities, and then going back in time. You can never you can't put yourself completely in the head of York time, but it was through the music of Purcell I felt, oh, it was thrilling to be working with it, you know.
Wonderful. Would you tell us a little bit more about that musical world, Ellen?
Well, I have to say one thing about Purcell and his nightshirt, which is the letter by which we know that it was performed earlier at Josiah Priest Boarding School than 1689 and probably 1687 is a letter that was sent from Aleppo by a second son who was sent to Aleppo to work with the it's not the East India Company, but the Levant Company. So he was sent to work, as sort of like an intern with the Levant Company in Aleppo. And he writes his first letter back, and we know what ship he was on. So we know when he left England. And he writes, do you know? And he's taken with him to Aleppo his harpsichord. And he's asked for more music to be sent. And one tries to imagine the tuning of the harpsichord by the time it gets to Aleppo on ship. But anyway, he writes a letter and he asks if Harry, by any chance, has written a keyboard version yet of the little opera, of the overture to the little opera that he had performed at Josiah Priest Boarding School. And then describes, he said there's another overture, and then describes that in detail, and that's the one that we know that begins Act 1. So the one that he actually wanted was apparently the overture to the prologue to the whole work, which he doesn't describe, alas. But we assume this refers to Dido and Aeneas because we don't know any other work it could. And since he just mentions the composer's name as Harry, we assume that's Henry. And so if you're going to talk about Purcell in his nightshirt, probably we need to refer to him as Harry.
Yes, Harry. That would have made my job easy if I could have.
No, I'm sorry. I just had to say this because I just think it's a wonderful story. Anyway, as you begin to get a sense of these composers as people,
yes,
it does help a great deal, especially when someone's as far away from us as Purcell.
Yes.
Our friend Harry. Purcell's language is, I think, very distinctive, and you can hear it right away. The first aria that Belinda sings, shake the cloud, you get these very sharp rhythms and a lot of what are called Scotch snaps, which go ta-da. So it's shake, so shake. And in the late 18th century, when Dido is performed by the Academy of Ancient Music, those are all taken out because they're considered old-fashioned. We can't have any short, long rhythms. I mean, when Dido sings, whence could so much virtue spring, so much is one of these Scotch snaps, and that just tightens the declamation in a way all the way through, which I find fabulous. And it is so anemic when you look at what the late 18th century composers did to the score in order to make it more late 18th century, smooth the rhythm out. So I think his sharp rhythms and the really strong declamation that you get from him is part of the score. The other thing to me that really stands out in Purcell are his ground basses. That is, the basses that repeat over and over again. So Dido, first aria, which is Belinda, is over a ground bass. And the second part of the aria, she actually begins singing the bass line as if the bass line is almost infecting her. And I feel that these repeated basses are an indication of a kind of obsession and of passion that you just can't get away from, and to a certain extent, fate. When we talk about Dido's Lament, which is built on a beautiful bass line, which is very chromatic, da 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 dum bum 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 bum, and this da 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 da, that chromatic motion in the bass line, just to me, I mean, over and over again, and you hear it over and over again when she's singing "Remember Me, but ah, forget my fate," and that's the fate, just it just keeps coming. The Purcell does this wonderful job of overlapping the vocal line with the repeating bass line. So the repeating bass line cadences, every 4 measures, there's a cadence because that's how it works. The vocal line always elides that so that the vocal line keeps moving. And the one time it really comes together very strongly, and the only time, is the very end of the aria. And I mean, I have the feeling that at that point, we get to Dido's death, is when her fate and her song come together. And it's then that the violins pick up the bass line and play the complete chromatic line from beginning to end, which we've never gotten in the bass, which has always been cut off halfway through at the dominant if you're a musician. But now it comes all the way down and the line completes. And with the chromatic line completing, I really think we're being told that this is her fate, that it has come to her. Her death has come to her. The only other ground bass is the second woman singing the story about Actaeon. And that's kind of crazy. I mean, I don't know how Ryan or Errollyn feel about the story of Actaeon and the second woman's aria, but I mean, I think it's almost terrifying, that aria. It has that bass line, da da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da dee da ba da 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 dee da dee da dee da dee da dee da, and over and over and over again. And it's like this by the end, to me. And I don't know how other people feel about it, but then, all the things that she sings about, all the, Actaeon being, eaten by his own hounds, it's just, it's terrifying. And I've seen performances where everyone listening to her sort of recoils from her aria, since she is talking about such a horrible situation happening in the forest, which is where they are. If it's part of a masque, if we understand that it's a presentation and that it actually is a dramatic moment, and that Aeneas's entrance with the boar's head is part of it, it takes on a different quality. But those are the only 3 arias in the entire score that have these ground basses. And in every case, there is this kind of obsession quality to them. And Purcell is just phenomenal in his ability to obscure the breaks in the repetition of the bass. And I think his ground bass practices are a particular aspect of his style. I do have to say, well, I don't know. Are we going to talk about how Dido's Lament is performed? Or is that a giveaway?
Oh yes, what do you think, Ryan? Should we?
Is it a spoiler?
We could just. What do you think?
You could
But it's just that in the
talk
process of, what do you think? What do you think, Ryan? It's just that in the making of this, it was such a great team, so that none of us can remember who came up with that. But it became very obvious that there was
Okay,
only.
well, let me just say one thing, okay?
Yes,
And then you can
yes,
tell me
yes.
whether or not it's worthwhile, okay?
Yes, yes.
In Dido's Lament, she sings, remember me, but just, you
Yes.
hear that vocalization, right? At the end of Act 2, when the spirit comes to Aeneas, he says, Jove's command shall be obeyed, tonight our anchor shall be weighed. But which is exactly the same vocalization.
Yes,
And
yes.
that then Aeneas and Dido at their the most extreme moments in their opera have, I mean, it's a very simple thing, but there are no other vocalizations in the opera. These are the only two. And that Purcell would choose to connect them and to connect the pain that Aeneas feels, which I take as real, although I have no love for him, I have to say. And her pain is enormously important to me. And there is a way in which their fate coincides with that echoing in Dido's lament of what Aeneas sings after he is told he has to leave. That's the kind of thing that Purcell does in his music, but this is really particular. And I think that is important to your story and to Dido's ghost.
Absolutely,
So well
that's
done.
fascinating.
And we definitely, I feel that point, we pick that moment up from the Purcell, and we sort of run with that in the new.
Yes. I'm sorry, we're just now talking in a way that is not helpful to our
Yeah.
listeners, but
No.
I did want to connect these two pieces together so that the listeners to the opera know that that connection exists, because it passes by quickly and it's not always heard.
I think that's wonderful, Ellen. And I think we could maybe linger on connection for a second. And Ryan, would you maybe talk a little bit about, so Ellen, you were talking about how Dido and Aeneas are connected in that moment in the Purcell, but how the musical worlds are connected in the opera between Wallen and Purcell, what those different worlds sound like, and how have the musicians and singers been negotiating, switching between Stuart Baroque and 21st century modern music with many kind of North African tinges and flavors and different registers of style.
Mhm. Well, I have to say, I think what Errollyn has done is absolutely ingenious, and it's almost intoxicating in the way that she's fusing these two worlds together. Ellen, you were speaking about the ground bass, and I think about the aria that Anna sings that has a ground bass. It's in 3/2, incidentally, but it's in this sort of rock groove and with a bass, electric bass guitar. And it's when she's the ghost of Dido visits her and says, "Get out of there, flee, take this flight, flee tonight." And it's just infused with this incredible pathos. But Errollyn is using this Baroque form of a ground bass that is concealed in this fantastic, rock groove. I think it's just a stunning moment. We got to read through it today with the orchestra, and to see our musicians that hadn't been working on the piece in rehearsals like the singers had, but the instrumentalists, their faces sort of lit up when they figured out what you were doing there. It was really quite fantastic. The other thing that I want to mention is you mentioned, Ellen, about the that I think it was Errollyn, about that incredible moment where Aeneas says, "I have to leave tonight. I must leave." Right? And Dido says, basically, why? Why? And he says, and then he quickly changes his mind. No, I'll stay. And it's that hinge, I think someone called it, where we really get the first time that we hear the Purcell and the Wallen overlap each other. We have the continual line, and musically the singers are doing exactly what Purcell wrote. But in comes this incredibly hypnotic and also disturbing harmonization in the marimba part that Errollyn has written on top of this. And I think that is, you called it a hinge, but that's the moment where these two worlds suddenly collide. And I find that absolutely stunning. And we were playing it today. It was just really great to see our Baroque Continuo team wonder what in the world is happening right here. This isn't the way it's supposed to go. I wish you could have been in the room for that, Errollyn, just to see the in the moment reactions to what was happening. The third thing I'll say is that I actually am really mesmerized and enamored with the way Errollyn has brought little motivic elements of the Purcell into her own writing, and it reminds me a bit of those great Benjamin Britten realizations of Purcell songs that, and I'm sure you must know of those, Errollyn, that, you're going along and you think you're hearing Henry Purcell, and then all of a sudden there's a Britten chord that sneaks its way in there. And it makes you look at the music in a completely new way. And I'm reminded a lot of that as I listen to your treatment of the Purcell, and when you start reorchestrating it and reharmonizing it in a way to make us listen to it in a new way and figure out how it sort of emotionally, the emotional underpinning of it, and looking at it as a memory and looking at it through somebody else's eyes, I find incredibly compelling.
And I think we must talk about Wesley Stacey's libretto that helps. I think what it achieves is bringing out the sort of depth of psychological, that's perhaps not there in the person. It's, what's the word? Yeah, it's sort of digging deep into Aeneas, basically. But the language, I found the language of the libretto was, it sort of seemed to go between these two worlds, between sort of archaic but modern at the same time, and always rhyming. So it was a great thing to work with. I mean, it was, as you can imagine, Ellen, it would have been a daunting prospect. But once you get to the people and work with, Nahum Tate's libretto is, it's fantastic.
Well, I think it's fantastic. A lot of people don't. I mean, Nahum Tate's come in for an awful lot of criticism. I feel as for a long time, I was the only person holding a flag for Nahum Tate and saying that his work is actually splendid.
Yeah.
I know people who know the entire libretto. In fact, I know much of it by heart because I can't. It's rhymed, so it's very hard to forget.
Yes, yes.
So you get, whence could so much virtue spring? What storms, what battles did he sing? Anchises' valor mixed with Venus's charms. How soft in peace and yet how fierce in arms. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
it's rhythmical. It flows. The rhyming patterns give Purcell something to play against because he doesn't always set it ta-da, 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 ta-da. So the rhyme, you have, the rhymes are coming regularly, frequently in couplets, but you have Purcell's elisions. I mean, it's the same thing he does with the ground bass. He's got ground bass is coming every 4 measures, but then he elides the vocal line over the top. And so it's interesting. I think he plays the same way with the text as he plays with the ground basses.
Yes.
And I think elision is probably the right word in the terms of what he is actually doing. But Tate does great things, and I think we overlook Tate. It's a loss if we do, because he's telling us all sorts of things. I mean, I just love asking students if, what actually is Dido's downfall? Is it Aeneas's charms or the witch's charms? Because Tate gives us both, right? Dido sings, when you just said it, whence could so much virtue spring? Anchises' valor mixed with Venus's charms. So, I mean, she's finding him both strong and charming, right? But the witches say, in our deep vaulted cell, the charm will prepare. So the witches are preparing a charm, but Aeneas's charms have actually gotten Dido's heart. Which charm does her in? And I think Tate doesn't tell us, but he makes it clear that there are 2 different kinds of charm infecting Dido.
Absolutely.
He has Belinda and the second woman sing fear no danger to ensue, the hero loves as well as you, Cupid strew your path with flowers, right? But the Cupids don't strew their path with flowers. Ye Cupids come and gather and scatter roses on her tomb. So the Cupids are not strewing her path with flowers, but they're scattering roses on her tomb. And it's very clear from the beginning to the end of the opera what is happening here. And it's it's text motive after text motive.
Yeah.
That is happening within the libretto. Then there are things happening in the score. The presentation of the story is so phenomenally concise,
Yes.
that there is no time for any breath. I mean, it just happens. The catastrophe happens so quickly. There's no weak moment because it just pushes through. And I think for your librettist, for Stacy to actually come up with a way of dealing with this text and to give you new text that fits and yet is modern
Yeah.
or more
Quite a feat.
modern.
Yeah.
I think you were phenomenally lucky in your
Yeah.
librettist, and I think the result is really spectacular. So
Thank
much
you.
better than another companion piece.
Yes.
Agreed.
So congratulations on all of that. So
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
I wonder if we could maybe just taking so just to add, Stacey's libretto is also as concise. I think it's about 500 words too, but again, like the Tate, brings in all of this great character and color, sort of colorization to these figures. And I wondered if I wonder if we might sort of like begin to wrap up our discussion with those two figures, with first off Aeneas. Ellen, you mentioned a little bit earlier that he sort of comes in and goes away. He's not really a major force in the, I mean, a major singing presence in the Purcell opera. But one of the things I think that happens in Dido's Ghost is we get to view Aeneas again and quite differently in relation to his past. Errollyn, could you tell us a little bit about your Aeneas?
Yes. What informed some of this research was the novel Lavinia by Ursula K. Le Guin. Do you say Le Guin or Le Guin? I don't know. Ursula K.
I
Le
think
Guin.
it's Le Guin, but
Le Guin. Yes, Le Guin. Anyway, and that tells us about, it's a fictional novel, tells us about Aeneas and Lavinia's life on Lavinium after, he's fought all his great battles, and it's Lavinia remembering her husband, and what's Lavinia both in a sympathetic light, but also we understand Aeneas no more the conquering hero, but just that there's a melancholy to it. And I think when this opera was performed, particularly when we took it to Buxton, it had about 4 or 5 performances, and every night it was the men who were in tears, and a woman came up to my husband, is just in bits, but all of us have regrets. We look back and we think, I could have taken that turn, or I could have taken that turn, and I think that's what happens in our opera. But alongside it is also the trying to understand that idea of fate. The gods were, Aeneas was propelled by fate. He didn't have a choice. That was the idea. So he's a man pulled in many directions. He's looking back, and at the end, it's a man, with regrets.
If I may just add to that, I think one of the things that's important to remember about Aeneas when we encounter him in Errollyn's piece is that this is his 3rd marriage. And I don't know how many wars he's been through, but he's a battle-weary, probably middle-aged man. And I think that it's one of the things that's very interesting to me is in the Persilacy, of course, we see him as the conquering hero and young and virile. And what Errollyn has given us is painted this much more fuller picture of Aeneas now, after all that has happened. And I think you've added such depth, you and Wesley together have added so many layers and depth to the role of Aeneas that we would have never known without it. And I think the music mirrors that.
You're actually counting Aeneas's relationship with Dido as a marriage.
She did.
He
She
didn't.
did.
He didn't.
See,
He made it
that's
very clear.
the problem in
The one night
antiquity.
forsook, yes.
I mean, that's a short marriage, Ryan, if it's only one night. You know, he
To
says,
Las
I never
Vegas.
promised you marriage.
Yes.
So, and in Purcell, one of the interesting features of Aeneas is that he's almost always out of key. He never sings in the right key
Hmm.
of the moment. I mean, the scenes are all in a key. And you know, when he comes on stage, the key of the scene is C major, and he's singing in like in E minor. I mean, it's like it's all
Yeah.
wrong. And the same thing happens even in the scene where he's told to leave. He's suddenly it's in A minor, and this is a scene that's in D minor, D major. So that his sphere in Dido and Aeneas is frequently E minor, A minor, and Dido's sphere is very definitely C minor, G minor. I mean, C minor is her grief, which is the first scene is all C minor, and G minor is her death scene, and it's all G minor. I mean that's really G minor all the way through. And you know, the sailors leaving is in B flat major. I mean, they're very clear, and yet Aeneas is frequently out of place.
Hmm.
And I think that's intriguing in terms of his life and what happens in the end and what he needs to deal with in your opera, Errollyn.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a man who isn't supposed to stop in Carthage. This is not a place that he should remain and linger, and he has to find
He's out of
harmony
place.
elsewhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. We've been talking about Dido an awful lot, yet she's not in the opera. She haunts the opera. I wonder if we could maybe just end with a discussion of the lead female, who is Anna, who is Dido at the same time. Errollyn, could you tell me a little bit about how you envisaged this character, how you kind of incorporated both sisters in one, and then maybe someone is taking on this big role in a week or so. Maybe if you have any kind of knowledge or advice you would like to pass on from your perspective of the Anna Dido character.
When Aeneas sees Anna, he sees Dido. She looks just like Dido, so that's a key to it. But also, there is a myth still remaining. Oh, I can't remember. It's called the Anna Perenna. It's a ritual that happens every year in Italy.
15th of March, according to Ovid.
Yes, it
Yes,
is.
the
Yes,
Ides
it
of
is.
March. Yeah.
And so in some ways, Anna's sort of related to Belinda, but she is one and the same, really. But also, it's like she's the living half of Dido. It's hard. I'm not the best person to explain it, but that Dido, being out of her, mortal body, is coming to rescue his sister because Lavinia's henchman, she wants to kill Anna. So Anna's life is in danger from the moment she sets foot, because Lavinia sees how besotted Aeneas is with Anna. But Anna, so there's sort of like twins of each other. But Dido, her purpose in the opera is to rescue her sister. Aeneas, his purpose is to get, just to see Dido one more time and ask her what happened after he left. And Dido they have a sort of showdown, and she says, look, I'm here, I've moved on now. I'm not describing this very eloquently, but I'm here to rescue my sister. And according to the Ovid, they escape their death by being welcomed into the river Numicus, the god Numicus. So they turn into basically water sprites at the end, which is not completely satisfactory, but they move to another plane. That's the idea. So I'm interested in seeing how the staging will work, because there's some staging issues, aren't there? When you know, but we pretty much think we solved it at the Barbican. But of course, the singer plays both.
So I've always felt that Anna and Belinda are very much different people. So I like the fact that Anna comes in as Dido's sister,
Yes.
because I think
Yes.
of Belinda as the first lady.
Yes. Oh, yes. There's that question.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean, Belinda really it is. I mean, I don't know why Tate gave her a name, actually. I think it
no.
would have been clearer to people if he had just called her First Lady, just
Yes.
First Witch and Second Witch. And I think
Yeah.
there's First Lady and Second Lady, and they're the ladies of the court. I
Yes.
don't think that Belinda is Dido's sister. And, I like that about your opera, is that Belinda in the opera is performed
Yes.
not by Anna. I mean,
Yes.
Anna is different. So,
Yes. Yes.
and I like that Anna comes back and takes care of, well, Dido comes back and takes care of Anna.
Yeah.
Is very touching to me as a sister.
Mm. And how are the singers finding working on the, the characterization of the characters? Is it clear to them?
It's interesting you asked that. Yeah, they're getting there, and it's our director, who's just phenomenal, Rebecca Miller-Kratzer. We've had a lot of sort of table talks and a lot of rehearsals that have been hijacked by conversations about who am I, what's going on, what's the story here, which I find absolutely fascinating. I love it, and I think it only adds to the drama and the depth of the character and what they bring to it musically. But I feel like they have a strong grounding now. They didn't a week ago, but they certainly do now. I think I'll just say one final thing. One of the challenges, which I love also, is reconciling these two worlds of Baroque and modern. And I think my observation, my opinion, and I'd be curious to hear what you think about this, Errollyn, is that you sort of brought this up, Ellen, is that the Purcell and the Tate are so rhythmically linked. I always think when you do Purcell, we have to, the rhythms are part of the dramatic fabric in a way. And I feel the same about what you've done with Stace's libretto, that what you've done on the page is so rhythmically linked to the words. And so this tie between Purcell and Tate and Wallen and Stace, I find weaves a really sort of continuous thread throughout the entire piece.
It was such a great libretto to work on. It was such a gift to me,
Mm-hmm.
Can't
And
wait to hear the live performance.
yes, nor me. I'm so thrilled to be able to come out, because I thought I just can't miss this. And of course, it's the premiere of the opera with modern instruments. Hitherto, it's been performed on period instruments.
I have to ask, Carolyn, when you wrote this piece, I know it was on a commission to work with John Bott and the Dunedin and consort, but did you always have the idea of Baroque instruments in your mind, or was that just a sort of a condition of the commission or something that came out of the commission? Had you had the idea of modern instruments at all?
I was writing for that sound, which I've written for before, but part of me absolutely loves modern instruments. So there are a few mistakes I made early on, that some notes went off the edge of the harpsichord, some things were really quite high for the violins, but actually it did work in the end. But I was actually really thrilled to hear the way the percussion and the electric bass fitted so well with that early string sound. So I'm interested to hear. But I like modern string sound too. So this will add another color to it all.
Of course.
Fantastic. Are there any areas we want to touch on before we wrap things up?
I think I
Well,
should add, if I could,
Mhm.
that because I talked about some sources, I just want to make clear that there are no musical sources of Dido and Aeneas until about 100 years after it was written. We have nothing in Purcell's hand. We have nothing from the time. The Tenbury manuscript, which is an important manuscript, seems to have been copied from an early manuscript and is in the 17th century style of notation, but it still is 1770 approximately. The Tatton Park manuscript was copied probably from the same source, but its notation was modernized and there were some modernizations. And then the whole slew of manuscripts that were prepared for the Academy of Ancient Music include wholesale revisions of the score. But there are parts of the score missing. If we believe the libretto, we have a libretto from Josiah Tate's boarding school, but we don't know if it represents the original or if it was the original. And we have the play text from 1700 when it was put into Measure for Measure. But there are so many questions about the music and about what needs to be added or doesn't need to be added, or even who sings what and what voice role sings, what voice you choose for individual characters seems to be different in the scores and in the 1700s. So, I mean, there are so many questions with Dido. It is I have said that you can basically do anything with this score and justify it because there are so many ways, so many sources to look at that do one thing or another. I mean, you've chosen for the sorceress to be a man,
Yes.
and that was certainly the case in 1700. We know who sang the role. So that may be the way Purcell wrote it, but it may be that at Josiah Priest boarding school it was sung by a girl, which is why in the Tenbury and Tatton Park manuscripts the role is in the treble clef.
Yeah, it's
But
full of
just questions everywhere, and you have to make some decisions when you perform, and just the audience should know that when you perform Dido, even if it's not part of Errollyn's Dido's Ghost, that there are huge questions about what is Dido. So Errollyn gives us one answer.
Ellen, the other thing that what you've mentioned, such an important point, and having worked on so many operas myself, the revisions that take place, and certainly in the Purcell, we don't, the different performances might have necessitated changes, and often what the librettos there, it's haunting that the fact that we don't have that score. It would tell us so much.
We just don't have it, and the earliest evidence we have of the work is the libretto from Josiah Priest boarding school, which we know it was performed at Josiah Priest boarding school in 1689 because of the epilogue that was written for it in 1689, but we don't know if the libretto that we're looking at is from the 1689 performance or the 1687 performance, which we postulate because of the letter from Aleppo about Harry. I mean, I love this. It's like a mystery. It's like a mystery story.
Yes. You should write it, Harry in the nightshirt and the missing score.
I know, Harry in the nightshirt. That is my next book, surely.
And on that note, I think possibly we've said all there is that can be said. Thank you so much for your insight and contribution today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're looking forward to the performance. I'll just conclude by saying next Saturday, October 18th, 7 p.m. and Sunday, October 19th at 2 p.m., all at the Thomas Till Concert Hall on the campus of MIT. And Errollyn will be with us, and Ellen, and we look forward to seeing you all in person. Thank you so much.
Can't wait to see you in person, Errollyn.
Yes, I can't wait. Been on it.